Hello everyone, welcome back to the Empower the Vote video series. I'm Marshall Garvey from History Specialists. We are now at a curious moment in our nation's history. Despite his flagrant and completely expected refusal to concede, it is now clear that Donald J. Trump will be a one-term president. Thus begins the chance to finally breathe and cleanse ourselves of the blitzkrieg of toxicity and trauma that his presidency dished out on a daily basis. Especially in this barbaric year, it is a respite and celebration that are well earned. Yet there is something I want to emphasize, not just at this moment in time, but for all time. Do not view Trump as a curiosity, a bizarre, inexplicable exception to the norm. Instead, view his presidency and all of its atrocities as part of a bigger picture. They are representative of a system that is rooted in injustice. As we've come to see more clearly than ever in a year of reckoning with systemic racism and the overlooked episodes of history that precede it. Given his bizarre, unpresidential behavior, relentless bellicosity, and shattering of political norms, it's tempting to dismiss Trump as a one-off, a comical buffoon that the political establishment and the public at large will be all too happy to never see the likes of again. But to do so would be to ignore that his actions are, in fact, representative of the worst aspects of our nation's character. They can be better understood by looking to history. Take his single greatest crime, the separation of migrant families at the southern border. Ben Ferencz, the last surviving prosecutor of the Nuremberg trials, deemed it a crime against humanity. And rightly so. It was, and still is, shocking to see such pain inflicted on so many families, leading to hundreds of children being orphaned. Even more shocking to see a majority of Republicans support it, and right-wing pundits like Laura Ingraham snidely mock children in cages as being like summer camp. Naturally, many responded by saying that a policy aimed at harming children and families was not who we are, as if it were unbecoming of the United States. In truth, family separation has been an almost constant mechanism in United States policy, from slave auctions to Native American repatriation schools to the prison industrial complex of the modern day. The migrant separation that was exposed in 2018 was worse than being uncharacteristic. It was a return to a rock-bottom precedent. Another of his most embarrassing moments was when he referred to certain African and Latin American nations as shithole countries, especially when viewed in light of his medieval policies at the border and the Muslim travel ban. Such a foul manner of belittling minority countries was repulsive. Yet labeling certain countries in this manner and pining for more immigrants from preferred nations is essentially the modus operandi of U.S. immigration policy for well over a century. Go back to the late 19th century, when the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was signed into law to target Chinese laborers. It wouldn't be repealed until 1943, when China was an ally of the United States during World War II. In 1924, Congress passed the National Origins Act quotas, which capped off immigration at 15% of what it was prior to World War I. In 1990, Congress added 50,000 immigrants a year as a diversity category, a measure that was intended to bring in more European and white people from countries with low immigration. This was at a time when Europe was prospering, and the Soviet Union's impending collapse was reshaping the continent. Yet this diversity lottery instead had the unintended consequence of allowing a wave of African migrants from countries like Ghana and Nigeria. Obviously, Presidents Chester A. Arthur, Calvin Coolidge, and George H.W. Bush, as well as members of Congress, didn't publicly call any third world nations foul names. But the mentality that Trump viciously laid bare, that some immigrants are preferable to others, is an unspoken constant. To conclude, I want to make clear that I'm not downplaying Trump's singular cruelty. He waged tremendous violence, both with his words and actions. He gave a smug credence to the worst impulses in humanity. Just remember that everything he did, everything he embodies, reflects a larger picture we must sustain our awareness of and fix in the long run. Changing presidents is a minuscule step in that journey. If we allow ourselves to forget about Donald Trump, we leave ourselves vulnerable to something worse down the line. One could say Trump himself is an example of that kind of thinking. During the past 4 years, there was a substantial chorus of people who began to pine for the days of George W. Bush. Despite his manifold crimes, and the fact that he veritably paved the way for Trump, it became fashionable to say things like, compared to Trump, Bush doesn't look so bad. Or, more dangerously, historical reevaluations that seek to elevate the 43rd president's purported successes over his grisly failures. Especially given how recent Bush's presidency still is, this level of amnesia, or just willful ignorance, is alarming. When Bush left office, the thought of such a renaissance was impossible. As ludicrous as it may be at this moment, who's to say the same couldn't happen to Trump in a few years? In the event that someone worse came along. There is that saying, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. This is truer now, when we must be vigilant in observing and fighting systemic racism, police brutality, climate change, assaults on women's rights, rising white nationalism, and much else. However, I believe that an understanding of history is the foundation of that eternal vigilance. If we forget the past, especially the immediate past, we lack clarity and reference as we navigate the present. We're more inclined to characterize current events as anomalies, as unprecedented, when in fact they can be better understood, or better yet, preempted, by knowing the past. With a greater and sustained historical perspective, we can not only ensure we're never taken advantage of again like we were the past 4 years, we can create a vision and a system built on justice and pluralism and equality for all, far beyond anything that we've experienced in our nation's history. Never forget Donald Trump and the culture of cruelty his administration implemented. Just also never forget that his presidency is a reflection of the worst elements of our long history. Let's do everything we can to make sure all of it is history. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Marshall Garvey for Empower the Vote and History Specialists, and I'll see you next time.